great teachers. What skills are most important for a teacher to have, and how can the profession attract and retain good teachers?
What skills are most important for a teacher to have, and how can the profession attract and retain them, other than sack loads of money, I guess? What's your take on this?
Excuse me, I think schools need good teachers, and I think those teachers need to be inspired and inspiring. I think that they need to have good subject knowledge, they need to be able to do their own homework, and they need to like children and have really good relationships with children and build and develop and nurture the relationships for those children. I think that's quite difficult to do when you have a huge workload, as many teachers do. I also think we lose a dramatic number of teachers from the profession. I think over 5 years we lose nearly 50% of our newly trained graduates, and I think that begs some questions for us as a nation about why we are losing so many people.
Why do you think so? Why don't you think so?
Personally, I think they go partly because of workload. It's a very challenging environment, and those teachers need to be supported and challenged through their early part of their career, and often that isn't the case.
Is it cash or is it workload? Where's the balance?
I think it's a combination of two things. Obviously, we need to pay teachers. We need to have make sure that they have a sensible career path, and I think that's something that the government is not very keen on at the moment. But I also think that they need to be supported and have good quality support in their early career development, and that isn't always the case.
All right. Any thoughts here about what makes a good teacher before we move on to our other guests? Any teachers here who are good? I'd like to ask some thoughts on how to think about it before we go across to David. How do you, David? When you're interviewing, what are you looking for in a good teacher, and what sort of package do you need to retain them?
I think a good teacher is made up of many different parts. It's the type of profession which I don't think people drift into anymore. I think it's the sort of thing that people have a real vocation to want to do. I look for two things. I look for a good technical understanding of being a teacher, which captures some of the things around subject knowledge. But I'm also really interested in the emotional intelligence of teachers, and how they're going to work with young people and how they're going to work with their colleagues. And you have to have both of them. If you look at the idea of a first-class PhD teacher of physics, who occasionally comes into our secondary schools, but doesn't have emotional intelligence to work with a class of 30 year 9s who are several leagues below his understanding of physics, you have a conflict around that. I have a slight concern at the moment that the government has a view that only people with first class and 2-1 degrees can be teachers. I'd like them to have a first class degree in children, and if they know something about this, then they can support that. I think that's a very, very useful way to do it. In terms of the package to retain and to motivate, I don't think it is so much about money. I think we fought hard, professional associations have fought hard over the years to increase the starting salaries for teachers and to look at the progression through that. So I don't think it's about that. I think workload is an issue, but I think that's often a very personal thing. One person's 50-hour week is somebody else's week off. So it's very hard to be prescriptive about work-life balance and set a parameter around it. I think there are three things that motivate people. I think if they work in a school where they're valued, and people tell them that they're doing a good job, and that includes the head and other people they work with, recognises their achievements, I think that's very motivating. The second thing I think is around how do we help to develop them, the kind of training opportunities, the kind of development opportunities that there are. I'm sure there'll be a question that I'll be able to talk about federations at some point today, but one of the things I'll speak in now is that when you're working across 10 schools, the opportunities for people to work in more than one school and to develop their understanding and have an impact with a great number of people is huge. And I think the third element of it is to feel part of something successful. One of our academies, formerly Culver School, now part of Community Academy, closed last summer and joined us in special measures. And 2 weeks ago, the school was inspected and is now out of special measures. And it's really noticeable in the last 2 weeks how the staff and the students are walking with their heads held just a little bit higher. No longer do people in that community think it's the worst school in Bath. They see it as a school that's improving, and I think that's really motivating.
And David, do people have to have any formal qualifications at all coming to the academy? Can you hire who you want?
Apparently you can. Yes, I think on certain circumstances I would. I mean, I can already think of examples where in one of our academies where we have a very high percentage of young people who've come from Somalia and have Somali Dutch as a first language. It's very difficult to find someone that's got a PGC in Somali Dutch. But there are people in our community who are teaching assistants or teachers in their home country for whom it's absolutely right and proper that we employ to help with those youngsters. So I can see situations where it is, but I don't see it being a cost-cutting exercise that enables us to get teachers on the cheap, because ultimately you pay the price for that lack of quality, because the need to train people who are effective in the classroom is still paramount.
Just have a show of hands. How many people here think you should have a degree before you can become a teacher?
A degree?
And how many don't? Thank you. Yeah. What makes a good teacher?
I'm looking at everything from professionals here on the panel. So I'm a school chair of governance, but I'm not a teaching professional. I'm a journalist by profession. But I think the issue of, I think one thing that we should and could be calling for straight away is an end to the demonisation of people who work in state education, which is very, very prevalent. Government demonises, and I'm afraid to say that it's Michael Wilshaw, who I think I've got more time for than other people have, and for some of the things he's trying to do at Ofsted. I think it's regrettable that he started his reign as the Chief Inspector by making all the speeches saying how terrible teachers were. I mean, there are some bad teachers, there's no doubt about it, we all know that, and we've all seen them in our schools. Most people, in my experience, can be helped to get better. So the most important thing for schools to do is to help support people to become better. Some can't, but they are a very, very, very tiny minority, and the vast majority of teachers are not bad. So, and also, I think if you're in a demonised institution, which is the other thing that happens, it's a very, as David said, it's a very, very negative experience for teachers and the parents and the students. So I think the head teachers are very important to this, because the head can set the culture of the school, he can have the high expectations, he can challenge his staff, but he can also ensure that it's a happy place to work where people do feel valued.
And the single skill, you think, is it communication, or is it knowledge of the subject? Yes, what would you say?
I mean, I'm talking about different levels. I mean, it's knowledge of subject at secondary level incredibly important, but I would say above all, I agree with everybody else, you've got to really care and be interested in young people. I don't believe you can do it if you haven't got that interest. And I'm not very happy about unqualified people. As a parent, I would rather have somebody with a professional qualification being put in front of my children. I think most parents would probably agree with that and be suspicious of people who aren't, because I think it's opening the door to lots of other things that you don't particularly want to do.
Okay. Amira Cole.
Well, as a parent, if there was someone teaching my child who I knew came from my community and didn't have a degree, I mean, I would be happy for them to do that if I knew they were flexible, they were creative, and their standards were at the same level or even maybe above somebody who did have a degree. So I would be happy for that, because I think that there's lots of people who don't have degrees, who don't have the opportunities to get degrees and actually are doing the work anyway. There's lots of people in supplementary schools, there's lots of people who just do things on a voluntary basis, who work at the level of people who do have degrees, and that's not recognised. So I think we should do something to recognise that. And if an opportunity did come up in a school, this may be an opportunity through the academies, that they could get work and maybe some sort of assisted training, then I think that we should go for that, because I think that there's lots of things that parents look at. And I think that the skill that somebody would really need to have for me would be more around being creative and being flexible to actually really understand the needs of the child in the class, but also the needs of the parent. Because once you get the child on board, that's part of it. But getting parents on board is very, very key.
So they've got to be diplomats?
They do, yes. It's so key that, to have a class full of difficult pupils, getting the child on board or half the way on board, but getting the parent on board will make that a lot easier.
Okay, Kevin Court.
Well, I agree with the people who said that it's not just about academic standards. First of all, I think to be a good teacher, you have to have a passion for social justice. You have to want to do the best for every child in your class, and you have to like the children you're working with. And I think that's absolutely crucial.
Are there many teachers who don't want all their children to do well?
Well, what I'm saying is that's the characteristic of a good teacher. And I think there are people who sometimes get into the profession who find themselves in their own profession and they find that they don't like the children they're working with, and that would be a sign of somebody who wasn't doing the job well. So I think that is the key characteristic, and Michael Gove is absolutely wrong to say it's about first and second class, high class honours degrees. That isn't what marks out a good teacher. The reason we're losing people in that first 5 years, I don't think it is the finances, although, if you're a graduate and you start as a banker, you get a lot more money, but I don't think that's the fundamental reason why we lose people from the profession. I think it is workload, but it's not just workload. It's not, because I think people don't mind working long hours if they're using those long hours to prepare exciting lessons. But I think people don't like some of the workload that we now have, which is justifying yourself the whole time, filling out forms to show the head that you've done the work. It's not doing the work. So it's an accountability culture that's gone mad, and that, I think, is causing workload that people find stressful as well as demoralising. I think that's part of why we're losing too many people from
All right. Anyone with their hands up in my classroom here? Nobody, no, you'll warm up as we go along, don't worry. I just want to just switch the question a little bit and just say, well, we've established what a good teacher is, perhaps. But are there too many poor teachers still in place, Fiona?
Too many?
Yeah.
Well, every teacher who's really poor is one too many, to be perfectly honest. But I don't think it's as prevalent as you would believe reading the media. I really don't. And if there are poor teachers, in my view, there's probably something wrong with the leadership of that school over a long period of time, and they haven't been given the support they need to become better.
You see, in my day, you started at school, and before long, you know who the poor teacher is. The rest of the staff know who the poor teacher is. The parents are onto it at the first parents' evening, and yet nothing happens, and they stay in place for 20, 30 years. Does that happen anymore? Is that just something they will be correct as yours?
Well, I think let's put some reality around this for a second. The issue about poor teaching is quite often context-driven. A poor teacher in one school is not necessarily a poor teacher in another school. A poor teacher who's had a bad lesson in one school has done a bad lesson with every kid they teach. So I think you have to be very careful about using generalised statements around that. But having said that, my responsibility as the head of the federation, and before that as principal of the school, was to ensure that those experiences that parents and children had weren't like you described. I think there is an absolute necessity for leaders to support people, to help people, but there has to be a kind of period of time when that support comes to an end, and you have to make a tough decision about whether that person can continue to deliver poor quality education to children they teach.
Let me bring in Kevin here. Do you find yourself defending poor teachers and disciplinaries?
Certainly, when I was in my previous role, I was the NUT rep for a school that Fiona was chair of governors at, or covering the.
That's going to make it easy.
So it is an easy conversation, actually. There are teachers who get into trouble for all sorts of reasons, and the union clearly need to have some support. But there are people who aren't cut out to be in a profession,
and would you tell them that, or would you say, look, we'll fight this to the death with you, or would you say, look,
no, come on.
The heads
we're harder with the teachers in these situations. I'll go in with, if I was with in David's school, I'd accompany the teacher who was in some trouble into the meeting. We'd hear what David said as the head teacher. I might ask some questions which probe that. But when we come outside, I'll say to the teacher, look, you've really got to get your act into order. And I can be harder with the teacher than David is. But I think getting the proportions of this right really matters. It is a gross exaggeration to say there are lots of incompetent teachers in our schools, and actually many teachers get pushed out far too quickly by heads who just don't like the way they're teaching. So you're a 55-year-old teacher, you don't teach reading via the phonics method, a new head comes in, wants to change a method, and sometimes teachers get pushed out for that sort of reason, and we need
You've got to go on the front line.
I'm head of a primary school, and often I find that a teacher may not be a bad teacher, but may have a specific problem. Perhaps their teaching of phonics, their knowledge is not as it should be, or their maths teaching requires a bit of support. And in my school, our strapline is with support and challenge. We constantly strive to be the best we can, and that applies to staff as well. It's an expectation that you constantly strive to do the best lessons you can at all times. If you need support, you'll have that support. And that creates a culture where there isn't any acceptable, bad teaching is not acceptable, but you do need to have that challenge and support where necessary.
Okay, Bev Humphries will answer the question. Did that satisfy you, those answers?
Very well.
Good. You have one satisfied customer already. Okay, well, the lack of hands up. I don't know what. Yeah. Oh, there is a hand there. We'll take one quick. Having said that, one move on. Yeah. If you that make the point, yes.
Yeah, actually, we have an observation that we're in a time of austerity, and the first discussion we have about education is how many bad teachers there are. It seems out of kilter to me that we're in a time of massive cuts, massive onslaught. I'm a social worker, I'm a parent, a social worker. It reminds me what's happening in social work. Who are the bad social workers? Not where the cuts come from. What about the context of people's lives? The people who, young children who are living in life. So I just want to make that observation.
Yeah, good for you, well done.
Sorry. The question was, what makes a good teacher? What do you think makes a good teacher?
Well, I think, as people say, a school which is supportive. I mean, I can see my boy's former head. It's a brilliant school. He loves it. And because it is a school which is exciting for him. It's exciting and rich, and it's a varied curriculum, and the teachers are engaged with the children. Absolutely. But the context is about government policy as well.
Thank you. Let's move on to our second question. John Barr, who is a head teacher at Meadowbrook Primary School, Pleasantville Place. John Barr.
Thank you. In the developing landscape, my question is, how can we ensure that the best teaching practice is shared among schools, both locally and nationally?
David, how do we share best practice?
Well, I think one thing you do, you start a federation up, and you start getting people to share ideas. I think it's difficult, is the answer. I think what you don't do is you don't share it by email. I think that's the temptation. That we put some great ideas up on the website and we assume that's it. Whenever I've seen best practice be shared, and not just sharing an idea, but having an impact in somebody else's classroom, it's through people. It's through the conversation, it's through the dialogue. So I'm not sure that this is something that nationally you can impose upon people, because I think you're talking about the balance of people being collaborative and genuinely wanting to be collaborative, and at the same time being able to communicate what works. And if I think of ideas that we move between our schools, we've never been able to just pick up the idea and say, right, just pop that in your school, it'll work. Because the context changes. People don't own that change in the school where they're the recipient of it. What you do is you share the process by which that idea came about. I think the introduction of teaching schools is part of that answer. I think there's still more to do. There's a lot more time. I think people are still trying to work out what the role of teaching schools are in the landscape, but the Federation is one. For me, sharing practice is absolutely the core of that.
Can I just go back to John? John, give us an example of what best practice might be. What do you mean by best practice?
I think what I mean by best practice is, I agree with David, that within pedagogy things develop. So currently, for example, we are exploring the use of iPads, and we would argue that where they're most effective is when they're a one-to-one tool. We would agree that my teacher who's doing that kind of having a blog will have limited effect in helping other schools to do that. So the context I come from is a feeling that maybe we're entering a more tribal period, and while I absolutely agree with everything David said, it interests me that he says start a federation, because my worry is that tribes tend to communicate within themselves and not always good at communicating between each other. So that's the context, I think, of my question.
Would you like to see more shared best practice between all sorts of schools?
I work from an international perspective, and all the international research says that good systems improve laterally. All the evidence from Ontario, every international system that's working at a very good level, everything is about lateral development. It's not about, as David says, hierarchical development. And that's what the context I come from. And obviously I work in this context, England, and it's how we I don't want to do a speech because that's what it costs not to do.
I think it's about collaboration. I think it's about collaboration. Teacher next door to in the next door classroom, right out to collaborating with our higher education institutions. And I think that is organically how we can improve and get the best teaching. I think, unfortunately, under the current system, where things seem to be going down, as you say, into sort of more dissipated groups, the collaboration has no accountability within it. And I think the landscape we're in at the moment is collaboration should not be taken to mean, oh, let's privatise it, let's brand it, let's sort of try and sort of make something out of it in terms of a private company. So I think it's about collaboration. I think it's about collaboration rather than competition. I'm all for competition in the right places, on the football field and those sorts of things. But I think there's a culture at the moment where as soon as something is developing well, there's a tendency to try and brand it and do the opposite of what Dave was saying, is to then go and put it into another context where it doesn't always work.
Presumably you have regular staff meetings, so do you, when you say, well, look, you'll exchange experiences, and you'll say, well, I find that I'm in better control of the classroom if I do this first, or the children stand up when I come in the room, or whatever it is, then you share that, wouldn't you, or do you not do that?
We do that, but what we need is a system with systems and structures to share that. I mean, most of my teachers teach nearly all day, every day, and have a short period of time for planning and preparation. So actually enabling that and doing that in a structured way it costs money, and that's a good way of using. Well, it's also a good way of using CPD. Continual professional development is to get people to talk to one another. Sorry, I'm using a teacher.
Something on the BBC, I've got thousands of them I could exchange with you. Let's, Amira Cole, have you any thoughts on this? I know it's, you're not in the classroom itself, but you are a governor.
A former governor. Yeah, well, gosh, I'm just thinking that if it doesn't work in this, if you haven't got systems in place in your school, then how does it work outside of your school? I think they have to be built-in structures, and they should be probably a priority in the school. That's so good practice is shared, because once you get it right in the school, I guess that's when it can then spread outside to your school, and working with schools side by side, and the learning schools as well. But I know, being a former governor, I know how difficult it is, but I do think it perhaps needs to be more of a priority within the individual schools to share practices with teachers in the school.
Okay, Kevin, are teachers good at chatting and sharing best practice, or are they sort of in silos?
They are good at it. They don't get enough time to do it. But the science of school improvement is quite old, and people know what makes good schools. And teachers talking about teaching, talking about the kids, and talking about education is vital to a good school. Some school systems give teachers time off teaching specifically so that they converse about what is the best teaching. Singapore is doing that at the moment. I think this question is really important, but I think John's context he's getting to is the split up into academies. And the question is, will that aid, through the federation, will aid some communication between the schools in John's federation? Will that be an overall good, or will the loss of communication between schools in different academy chains be a negative net effect? And that's our worry. Is when I started teaching.
Well, you mean that state school, or the people in the traditional state schools, staff won't be able to talk to the academy staff?
Well, what I mean is that in the recent past, good local authorities, Camden was a good local authority, still is, and encourages schools to come together and share best practice. When I was a physics teacher in Camden, we used to meet periodically, science teachers from all the schools in the borough, talking about best education practice. Now, that will stop if all the schools become academies. And then there's a question of whether the federations is going to outweigh that. We're worried about the negative effect of breaking all the schools up, people being insulated and isolated. But there is a tension between those two things. ARC, one of the bigger chains, is doing a lot of this work inside its chain. But we're worried that it will become isolated, and there'll be an ARC teaching practice, and that won't correspond to it. So we think there's going to be a negative.
Just a quick response to that, then.
This could be a long answer, or it could be a short answer. Well, the short answer is that I don't see that happening. The short answer is it's in nobody's interest for us to create a federation based upon collaboration and then becomes the issue of a single school.
All right, Fiona.
Okay, well, I agree with everything that's been said. I was going to say, if I'd answered earlier, that I think we know a lot about school improvement, as Kevin has said, and most good schools are doing this, sharing good practice within the school already. But I think what the question is really asking about is about the fragmentation of the system and what happens if you haven't got any sort of local glue to facilitate this process. And so it's an issue about who is the coordinator, what is the middle tier, and what are the incentives. I mean, what worries me about the academy conversion programme is they don't seem to put in strong enough incentives to make schools or help schools to collaborate if they don't want to in this new landscape. I think competition and collaboration can go hand in hand. And the head teacher put it to me like this: that you could be, if you're the GB Olympic team, you could be competing with each other, but you still want the same team to win. And I think there is a case for possibly judging schools differently as groups of schools to give them an incentive to do the best for everybody in that group. And Kevin's talked about Camden. We've got no academy conversions in Camden. Every school is good or outstanding. Something is working there with the local authority. It didn't work with every local authority, but you need some middle tier. So I think what encourages me as I go around the country actually and visit schools and write about them is that what's happening is people are now seeing this fragmented landscape and trying to find other ways to come together because they want to be part of something bigger. I do really believe that. I don't think people in society really want to act as totally as individuals. I think people like to belong to a community, they like to have support, and so what I see is a lot of informal school-to-school support mechanisms springing up in schools that are academies or in federations or whatever, because that's what people want. And in the end, I think that's what will prevail, but then I'm an optimist, so I could be wrong about that.
Good. Well, let's optimistically press on, if we may, to our next question. It comes from Tom, is it Pin or Pine? Pine. Tom Pine, who's an education consultant. I'll tell you, just got to say, you never know pronunciation guy, I'll say it's very complicated. Tom Pine, over to you.
What makes a good school? What makes a good education? Isn't it simply about how well children do in exams and other statutory assessments?
Is that what you think?
I think it's much broader question than that. But I think the message of prompting the question is that I fear the time may be turning. And after the 25 years that I've been in the profession, and I think the inclusion agenda has generally progressed well over that time, I fear the direction may be turning.
Okay. Well, basically, your question was is good education doesn't mean doing well in exams. I think everyone would agree there's probably more to it than that. But let's try and just flesh it out a bit. We've not had much of a break, but I'm going to come back straight to you on this.
Well, I was just saying no. I mean, I took part in a project about a year ago where I had to go around the country talking to parents about what they wanted from their from their children's schools and what information they wanted. And it was fascinating. We did a poll of 1,000 parents. And in fact, exam results were important, there's no doubt about it, but they weren't the most important thing. I mean, they particularly cared about their children being happy and safe, for example, people often forget about, especially in primary schools. They cared about the community, and we asked them this question, what would an educated, rounded, qualified 19-year-old look like? And they did talk about being, literate and numerate and all those things, but they also talked about so many other things, having enjoyed culture, being able to manage money, being able to manage their own personal care and health and all these things. So I think education is a much broader thing than that, and I do think if we're talking about what the consumer wants, we can confidently say that is what the students and the parents want. And we should be looking for accountability measures that measure the broader aspects of education simply consider the
And would you be prepared to say, well, instead of getting 3 A-levels, get 2, but have more of a rounded education?
Well, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, to be perfectly honest. I think we have 3 A-levels. I mean, I'm quite attracted by the sort of the proper, not the go-style baccalaureate idea, but the real baccalaureate idea, where you have the rigorous qualifications, but you also have things like community service and citizenship and stuff like that into it. And I do think it's very interesting that we're whittling away in the state sector the things that people pay for in the independent sector. So the enrichment, the music, the drama, the sport, the extracurricular stuff, all that's becoming less valued in the state sector by the accountability measures. Well, that's a bit grey, less clear than it was a few months ago. Because I think people have a right to those things. And I think particularly the children, the least advantaged children in society, should have a right to those things if their parents can't afford to pay for them. And I hope schools will be able to continue to provide all those things.
Rachel.
Hi.
lot about. I asked my pupils what they thought made a good school, and although academic achievement did come out, it had to be drawn out in places. Things like, always challenging us, never letting us sit in our comfort zone, and that's for every subject, that's not just for English and maths. And the problem is that what is not easily measurable doesn't seem to be valued by this current government. So those things that do create confident young men and women who are lifelong learners don't necessarily get picked up and valued by the measures that we're now under. Having said that, I think we would be selling our children short if we were not insisting on those standards for every child, whatever their background, to make sure that every child does achieve the measurable standards, because actually that's their liberation, that's their ticket out of any negative situation they may find themselves in. So I think you have to do everything.
Is there an argument that it's the parents' job, the carer's job, to make sure their children are rounded, and it's your job to get them those qualifications which will get them to university, which will get them into good work?
That would make my job very, very easy. Unfortunately, I think we all have responsibilities for the young people that we work with, and some of them do not have a straightforward background. They may have bereavements, they may have complications in their personal lives, in their home lives, and it's our job, I think, as a society, to support those children and to ensure that they get the best outcomes they can.
No, I really am. You're responsible for 6,000 children almost. How important do you think academic qualifications are, and is that actually the bottom line?
Well, likely or not, the exam results are important, and the reality is that if your exam results don't perform in comparison with other schools, then Ofsted will put you into a category, league tables will show you where you are, and actually your school and the reputation of the community becomes very difficult, and so we can't be naive about that. But having said that, exam results are not the only measure of good schools. I'm taken by Fiona's notion about happy and safe children. I think that's a really important aspiration. An indicator of that is attendance. You don't see very many happy and safe schools where attendance is 80%. That's very significant. We talked about teaching earlier. I think there are 4 things that I would look for if I was going to describe. If I was ever on an interview panel talking about a good school, I'd say these 4 things. Okay. Just fine.
Give us 3, perhaps. We'll get to 4.
But even cutbacks here. Number 1 is the curriculum. And the curriculum, for me, 30 years ago, I graduated with a music degree. I spent the first 10 years of my life teaching music and PE. And I can't conceive that a school that without good arts and without good sport can be deemed a good school. Secondly, children are on a journey. And our job as teachers is to help them along that journey. They come in through a tunnel, they go out through a tunnel, they go on to something else. Our job is to make sure that the support and the advice and guidance is as good as it can be. Parents' engagement is critical. I talk a lot about the learning triangle between parents, children and teachers, or adults in school. If any corner of that triangle is not working effectively, children's education chances are in decline. So engaging parents is really important. And the 4th one, which I mentioned to an earlier question, is about the morale of the workforce. Again, you don't see many good schools where people don't want to be there. So those 4 things are the cornerstones for what a good school makes. Let's also be very clear though, that if a school in your community is not performing at the same level as a school in a middle-class leafier suburb, it doesn't mean it's not a good school.
In your experience, how important are qualifications, and should schools actually really focus on getting the children that certificate?
Well, me myself, I think yes. I think education and the exams are very important, and getting good grades is very important. I think we did a holiday scheme a couple months ago, and it was very interesting because we asked the parents what they wanted for their children, and this was in the school holidays. And they actually said we want them to do some academic work because we feel that in the holidays there's such a break. that when they go back to school, they actually fall behind. So that was quite surprising to me, because but when we asked the children, they wanted to be more free and, you know, yeah. So I think sometimes it can be different what you want as a parent for your child, and obviously what your child wants as well. But yes, I mean, it is it is important. I think we have to look at, one, the pressure we put on young people to get good, you know, standards, high levels of standards, because I think sometimes that can be too much. But also, I mean, the reflection of how good, how comfortable and how happy they are in school. We see that reflection in our young people in society as they get older. So, you know, if they don't have good experiences at school and they don't work on their social skills and all that, we see that later on. So it's really important that those things are dealt with in school. And I really do believe as well that it's not just about the school's responsibility, all the parents' responsibility. It is all of our responsibility to make, you know, rounded children.
You see, I had an English teacher I was very fond of for a couple of years, but who didn't really believe in teaching grammar, who didn't believe in setting homework, but we just had chats in class, which was lovely. When I started working for the BBC, when everyone knew good grammar, and they all had qualifications longer than your arm, I think, well, actually, mate, why didn't you set some homework and maybe do something? Let's just take something from the floor, gentlemen in the blue jumper. Just wait for the mic, just one second.
Sorry. Just the flip side of that. David, you talked about whether a good school would also have very low attendance figures. Similarly, a school that focused completely on exams and had everybody on 8 or plus more GCSEs and 3 A-levels, would they not also be well-rounded individuals, or are they likely to be truants and thieves and that sort of thing? If you focused on the exams, everyone did as brilliant as they could, surely side effects would be there would also be good rounded individuals in society.
Okay. That's a nice point. Thank you. Anyone else like to make that point before I move on to the NEC? Okay, well, let's just...
sorry. We do have some speakers here, David.
Sorry, I can't see you on the right side. But just the back. Okay, the lady here is the microphone. That's it.
Just to pick up on the point in which the all-party group might take on social mobility is about recently, Jeff was saying about qualifications, is that they found that employers were saying hiring people for qualifications, but sacking them for attitude. And so I suppose in response to that gentleman's question, no, I don't think we should make the assumption that people who are highly qualified are automatically fully valued individuals. And actually social skills and the ability to sit in a classroom and talk might have stood you in very good stead sitting around the BBC.
Well, I don't want to. Yes, the lady here has a hand. Oh, this is actually the back there, and then we'll come to the front. Yeah.
Probably slightly related to the social mobility question, but there's a lot of talk earlier about teachers and how to make good teachers. But there's also a question about the aspiration of young people and how to motivate and inspire them so that they are able to achieve. And I think that's a particular issue within the state education system. And I'd like to know what people's thoughts are on that.
Okay, well, we've got questions to address that, I think, later on coming up. But do you have that? Yes, it is. Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to sort of make a statement that teachers can be good, unless they have support. I mean, a classroom can have a special needs child in there, but if the teacher doesn't have enough support, then the children who don't have special needs might not be able to get the full attention, or things might go awry. So how do you make sure that teachers come forward and ask for help? I mean, is that a normal culture for them to be able to, or do they feel that they'll be penalised if they feel that they're not, doing a good enough job, they can't manage?
Because of those children in school. But let's get back to the qualifications. What you've got in mind. What do you think about qualifications? How important are they to you or to any child that you have?
Well, I've got a child, I'm a mum, and education is very, very important to me now. When I was in school, but definitely for social mobility, we were very, very encouraged to talk, to discuss. I think now a lot about education and results, but when it comes to, I think it's a whole rounded issue. Everybody's
let me give you a trial choice. Let me give you, this is probably unfair. You have two schools side by side. One, if you send your child there, you keep your nose clean, they come out with 8 GCSEs and 3 A-levels. One, where they concentrate a lot on sport and drama and all the rest of it, you come out with 6 GCSEs and 2 A-levels. Which would you choose? You choose the fewer qualifications?
Yes, because I need to know that he can be around people, because that's in the real world, you have to deal with people all of the time.
Okay, Kevin, let's take a review on this. How important are qualifications, and is school all about exams?
People spend a lot of money to send their children to private schools because they want them to get very good results. I want those same good results for every child in every school. So I think you want the best results. But you have to look at the system you're building, and you have to look at what you're testing and what you value. And the system currently, it looks at things that don't matter as much, and we need to build a baccalaureate, like Fiona was talking about. So you do value academic, you do value vocational, but you value the ability to cooperate, you value the love of learning, you value those questions as well. The system is what's wrong, because at the moment, in many schools, teachers are told to concentrate by the school management on children on the CD borderline, because that's where the league tables is. So it's not even the question that Tom's asking, that are exams what matter. In some institutions, it's the CD borderline that matters because of the struggle over the league tables. And we need
so
to
you've got to focus on those children who may just fail or may just...
And teachers will be wanting to help a child who's going to get an E to get a D. They'll be wanting to stretch a child who's going to get an A to get an A star. But the school has to concentrate its resources on the CD borderline because of the league table. So we need to change that structure so that we are valuing the work that we do with every child.
Okay.
There's this focus on league tables and results and exams from a teacher's point of view. There's a lot of track and the ability to be good, well-rounded education for all the children.
What do you think?
I think it does detract from a teacher's point of view. If you're focusing on league tables, exams, results, you're again trying to push those children that you think are on average or in the middle, as opposed to stretching those children that need it and supporting those children that need it.
All right, let's get on with this gentleman in front of you.
Hi, I'm a parent myself here. Do you think that in the schools that we have at the moment, the classes are too big and the kids that cause problems at the front are pushed to the back and the ones at the front are taught more?
Well, your side then, again, it's a big question. Let's take David, just what are a couple of points if you would. First of all, do your teachers concentrate too much on the children who are on the cusp of a C because you need to get them through the exams? And what size is your classroom?
Okay, so the issue about CD borderline is a very real one. Employers don't talk about 5 D grades, they talk about 5 C grades. Sixth form colleges and universities don't talk about 10 grades from D to G, they talk about A's to C's. So there is rightly a focus around that. So whether we like it or not, that's the landscape we live in. However, the bit I would also say is that I think in good schools, and I might include my own in this, we do think about the challenge of the kid who's on a grade E or who a grade D is an incredible personal best. We do think about the child who is predicted to get an A star and a B isn't good enough. And I think you do have to do that. The strategies that you use for both are very similar. We're not talking about different strategies completely. It's about motivation. It's about understanding where the gaps are. It's about filling those gaps in. It's about giving really good feedback. And we've talked about the theme of parenting, a lot of the stuff this afternoon. It's also about that partnership. I'll say it again, it's this learning triangle, teacher, child, parent. If the parent is engaged in that child's learning, you have more capacity and resource to use that. Class size is an interesting one because the research actually doesn't talk so much about the size of the class, it talks about the ratio of adult to children. So if I think you could have a class size of 40 if you've got 2 equal quality people there working with children. It's the ratio that's important, not the number of children in the classroom to one teacher.
Sorry, you think 2 class of 40 with 2 teachers?
Well, I'm not suggesting that the class of 40 is ideal, but I'm giving you the example of the ratio of 1 to 20.
But say 1 teacher, 1 class, how many ideally would you say?
Well, the average that we would have in our secondary schools in Key Stage would be 1 to 26.
26, what would you say? Give us a number.
I've got, in my school, I've got classes ranging from 29 to 20, and I much prefer the 20. I think I do disagree with David on this one. I think it's about relationships. I work in the primary sector, so it's different. It's slightly different, but I think what makes a class work well and why small classes are better. I mean, it's something for us to say that they're not particularly having an impact, but that's why in the private sector they have small classes. It's about the relationship between the educator and the child. We've got smaller classes, that feedback that you can give to those children, the support you can give to those children is much better.
So you're down in the 20 mark. Sorry. Fiona, what do you give us the number? Just man of interest. What do you reckon?
I think there is a difference between primary and secondary on this, but I'm sort of with David because I think you had a really fantastic teacher in a class of 30. It would be better than having a not really good teacher in a class of 10. I think that's probably what goes on in a lot of schools in the independent sector, incidentally. But people think that because classes are small, that they're necessarily better.
Okay. Amira, ideally, what classroom size would you think? You go to a room and think, oh yes, this is about right.
I would go smaller. I would say maybe 25. I wouldn't touch the 30 mark. My oldest son was where there was like 25 pupils in a class, and that worked really well for him. So now my younger children are in classes where they're bigger classes, and I don't think they get enough sort of one-to-one.
And Kevin?
I think our government should be investing in education and aiming to get class sizes down to 20. 30 is not a national... 30 isn't an international figure. We think it's the norm because it's what the class sizes have been here, but other countries have lower class sizes. I was on a platform of the Conservative Party conference debating with somebody who said that we should... in a fringe meeting. And they wanted to know whether we should import the DNA of private schools into the state system. And I thought we should get their class sizes and their funding. That would be what we would
I think there's a real difference between aspiration and reality, particularly in a city like Bristol at the moment. I'm a parent and a governor in a South Bristol school, and we are packed out to the rafters, and there's a massive shortage of school places. And we're in a situation as a bunch of governors, we're making decisions about whether we become protectionist, which is what's happening in some schools in South Bristol, where they're saying this is the size we want our school to be. Well, because they say that's the kind of school we are. We are a small school. And the school that I'm part of has decided that, our mandate is to serve the local community. And, by default, that means we're growing. That's not necessarily what we want, but, it's a complete and utter, it's an impossibility to have class sizes of 25, and,
So what would your class size be?
they're all 30, and apart from historically, some small, 30 pupils and teaching assistants if there's any kids with special needs.
Thank you. Do you mind? We're halfway through, so I want to get through some more questions if you don't mind. Forgive me for speeding on. Chris Askew is an architect. Are you here, Chris? You are, right up front. And he has a question that he's interested in.
Thank you. As an architect, I'm inevitably going to talk about the built stock evidence we're teaching. The Department of Education has recently stated there is no convincing evidence that spending enormous sums of money on school buildings leads to increased attainment. The question is, what do you think the effect of both good and indeed bad school design is on children's learning?
Okay, so the school buildings we're talking about now, I think this is a city where, am I right, every secondary school has been rebuilt? Every single one. Some of them are absolutely amazing buildings. Has that contributed to Bristol climbing up the league tables? How important are the buildings? Tricky. Rachel, what's your building like?
My building is 80 years old. When I moved into it 5 years ago as head, it had inadequate heating, it had inadequate roof. That did impact on the quality of those children's education because we were addressing needs which shouldn't be in terms of keeping the children warm and dry. Having said that, and I think that children deserve to have the best quality learning environment. Our children deserve that. Having said that, I don't think that the age or the size of your building necessarily impacts on it. It's the culture that you have within it. It's a bit like if you live in a Victorian house or a new built house, they can equally be good learning environments, but it's not necessarily the age of the building, it's the maintenance, the upkeep and the culture within it that I think is the most important.
Have you got asbestos?
I think most schools of that age do, but it's about managing it, and I know lots about it, but I won't bore you with it.
No, you won't bore us, but I will, because it's a subject we're discussing on the Sunday Politics tomorrow at 11 o'clock BBC One. By the by. David, your buildings are pretty extraordinary, aren't they? Does that mean that your results are automatically good?
Well, two of the schools are. Bristol Brunel Academy and Bristol Metropolitan Academy are new builds. But if you look at King's Hope Academy in South Gloucestershire, Bar Community in Bar, and Hans Price in Western, they're not. And there is a difference without a shadow of a doubt. The reality is the building itself never sits any exams. The building creates the climate in which the conditions are right for that. So if you're going to give me a choice of having all my schools of the quality of Bristol Brunel and Bristol Met, of course I'd say yes to that. But I can't help but think that the answer to the question lies in other things we talked about today. Good teaching is good teaching wherever it takes place. But I want to pick up on Chris's question, so it's a good question, particularly the second half about the difference of good and bad buildings and design on it. I think the thing that I notice in the two new buildings that we have is that the buildings have been designed around learning and around the needs of young people. The buildings that we've inherited from the 50s and 60s have been around compliance. And I think that shapes the culture and the ethos of the school quite significantly.
What do you mean compliance?
Well, I'll twist it around if I can, Dave, just talk about where I think it works. So, for example, in Bristol Brunel and Bristol Met, you have a lot of natural light, you have a lot of colour, you have wide corridors, you don't have places where children can hide and where bullying can take place. The toilets, for example, which are often one of the first things we show people around, are not the well, you'd be surprised. They say an awful lot about the culture of the school because they're open plan, they're safe, children don't feel uncomfortable being around the area. It's actually that they're being used for the purpose in which they've been intended. I think what you tend to see in schools that are 50s and 60s is you do see dark corridors, you do see playgrounds where there's no play space. You do see lots of offices which don't have any glass in it, because teachers hide behind it. So I think what you see in terms of new buildings is it creates the culture and the environment where you have a much more openness between the adults in the school and the children in the school. And I think it's part of that debate we talked about what makes a good school and what makes it happy and safe environment.
Let's go back to Chris, because presumably you've designed these schools. I mean, what do you think? Do you think actually it makes much of a difference, or is it something spiritual about, organic about the school which actually matters?
I think it does make a difference. And I started thinking before I came about anecdotal evidence. And I realised that's actually what's the wrong thing, because what we've done in the last 12 years is embarked on the most significant building programme of the schools that this country has ever done. And yet we haven't actually evaluated our buildings properly. We haven't evaluated them as a group. Performance on energy, performance on acoustics, performance on user satisfaction, performance on education. And I think that's what we should be doing, is taking this first on, realised, and find out what is good, find out what is bad, and work with that for new schools in the future.
Any teachers here prefer the old cosy schools, the big modern ones? Do you design those atriums, those vast atriums that we see in modern schools now? It must be quite a thing if you're only 11 years old.
Well, scale of schools is important, especially for younger children.
But they should be smaller, shouldn't they?
Yeah. Designing an all-age school is a particular beast.
All right. Kevin, school hall buildings, are you bothered or not?
I am bothered. I wouldn't want to exaggerate it. I mean, you talk to teachers in the third world and you see the circumstances they're putting up with and they're still teaching. I wouldn't want to exaggerate it. But Michael Gove currently is reducing the level of qualification and specification for schools. So he's saying we can have 15% smaller circulation spaces. I think that's a negative backward step. It means children running into one another more often in the corridors. It gets, so it is hitting up the culture. I wouldn't want to exaggerate it, but I would make the point that bankers make sure that they work in very nice buildings. And I think that children do need something. Children do need something from the quality of the building they're in. If the government is letting the fabric of their building decay, then the children know that that's something that's not regarding them very highly. So I'd plead for a change of priorities and more money for school building.
Well, I was just going to say that we haven't actually embarked on the biggest school building programme we've ever known because it stopped before we continued it. And I was in my borough is one of the boroughs that stopped just as we were about to start. So we're in a situation where I will have to dispute that it doesn't make a difference, that it makes a difference to results, because we're really trying to do as well as we can with the same terrible old buildings that we thought we were going to get rid of. And the schools are doing well, but there's no doubt that it's not only about learning, is it? It's also about behaviour. And I think that's the biggest impact certainly that we can make on the schools that I know by changing the buildings is on the behaviour. What worries me about it now is we have a very unequal situation. So in Bristol, you've all got fantastic new schools. In other parts of the country, people are still putting buckets under holes in the roofs. And in some areas, like where I am, the local authority is trying to fund school building. But they're now, so we've got BSS schools in neighbouring boroughs, we've got the local authority which is funding school building according to the old building regulations, and then you've got the Gove building regulations, which some schools are getting some money for, which are going to be sort of flat pack Tesco style buildings, built by, promoted by this guy Sebastian James, who incidentally went to Eton as a member of the Bollington Club. And if you want to know where the school buildings are, look at the Eton website where they spent £1 million on a drawing school, just on a school for the pupils to learn to draw. And that will tell you that actually it is something that we should be valuing for all children. And I think the final point I would make is that for the children who come from overcrowded homes or homes where there isn't outdoor space, there isn't greenery, all the things that we might be able to take advantage of for our own children, they should have access for them to that in their schools. And I think it is about the self-esteem of the pupils. And what I do see when I go into new schools is that the pupils feel that somebody values them because they've put that investment into them. So I think overall it's
Thank you. I was very involved with the Building Schools for the Future programme and worked both with children, teachers, governors and members of the community. And what we did learn in Bristol when we rebuilt all the secondary schools, one of the most important things was involving everybody in the design of the school. And so you got a design that the community, the pupils, the teachers, the governors, all felt an ownership of. And we've talked about, how do you deliver good teaching? One of the tools that you need to deliver good teaching is to have a school that works. And what the secondary schools do, they work. They work for pupils, they work for the teachers. And I think we have to learn from that. It's very unfortunate that Bristol was the only city that managed to rebuild every single secondary school, and all the other cities in the country, when their teachers, when their governors come and see the facilities that we've got, they're absolutely gobsmacked and they want them.
Quite right. Educational standard improved in Bristol since these new schools were created?
Lots. They've been going up ever since we started. It's part of the mixture of things that have helped, and it has been pointed out that what we weren't able to do, because the next phase of development in Bristol was actually to work on the primary schools. A primary school that was built 150 years ago wasn't built to deliver education as it is today. And what we actually need in cities like Bristol is actually to rebuild the primary schools so that they actually, build the children up so that they're more ready to actually... And I think it is a very... Sorry? I think a lot more money has probably been invested in Eton, and I'm not worried about what Eton's got. What I'm worried about is what we have in Bristol and what we have to offer our children here. And I haven't heard a single child, a single governor or a single teacher who works in our new secondary school who hasn't said that they've got a good environment for which to work on. And actually, we had an awful lot of money invested in those schools. And it wasn't actually only the money, it was the fact that they were all involved in the design.
I have already asked the question, so don't answer. But I think, first of all, the original question may be taken out of context in that I think that was a comment about the Building Schools for the Future programme, which, although very successful, it's where I work myself. It did. We were quite gratuitous in our spending. For example, I know of a school in north of here where they spent £60,000 on the school reception desk. All that kind of stuff has got to change.
£60,000
on the school reception desk. I would dispute Fiona's point. I agree with it in principle, but I'm not sure that we are going to be delivering flat-pack schools in the Tesco style. I think we've come up with the baseline designs which, albeit I agree with you, they are slightly narrow in space and they're quite well tested in the industry, and the industry is still developing and producing against them at the costs that we've made available. So I would dispute that that's going to be a bad school. Yeah, of course.
My point was not necessarily being bad. My point was about the quality of opportunity and facilities across the sector. What you've now got, because of the way that BSF was halted, and I agree there are many things about it that were wrong, is you've got massive inequalities between the provision of certain areas. And I think that's a very
the department is currently trying to deliver 250 of the next highest priority in terms of facility need rather than...
But there'll be nothing like the BSF schools. And then you've got the other schools who've got nothing at all.
No, I agree. There will be nothing like the BSF schools. They're going to still be £12 to £15 million for a new secondary school, £5 to £8 million for a new primary school. That's a good...
It's a lot less than BSF.
Of course it is, but we can't afford BSF, and quite a lot of BSF was taken up with what I would call frivolities, like getting the community and children involved in the design. Why is the design of a school in Bristol, why should it be any different from the design of a school in Hull or Birmingham? We're talking about the same types of communities, the same children. I go to work in an office, I don't have any say in how that office was designed. There are some things I would change, and there are lots of things that I like. Why is it so important to engage the community so widely, which is an expensive and time-consuming exercise, when the key thing is to deliver new facilities as quickly as we possibly can, so that we don't have the leaking buckets, the asbestos rooms, that sort of thing. And you're all chuckling, but I have to
So I wasn't going to talk about the question, Chris's original question, it ties me so much. As a recently appointed principal designate for a new school to be built on the south coast of Bristol border, your question is really interesting to me, along with the other questions today. If I just read you a really short extract, which I think is young children, and I didn't write this in the previous course at the end, young children will spend time in small groups learning by imagination and experiment, and part of the time they will sit more quietly, perhaps listening to stories, learning to read, write, and count. The directional classroom, with its rigid rows of desks to stuff the desk-bound child with facts, is not suitable for the needs of young children. That's an extract from 1955 Buildings Bulletin Board. Listening to everybody else's comments and follow-ups from Chris's original question, I'm obviously in a hugely privileged position, creating a school due to the pressures of school places that we talked about earlier, and we're thinking very carefully about the facilitating and enabling environment for those 4, 5 and 6 year olds that are coming through the doors in September. But it's not about the building itself, it's about all the other things that people have mentioned. This is my personal perspective. It's about all the other things that people have mentioned through the other questions, the quality of the curriculum, the relationship with parents and carers, the schools that hub within the community. Those are the things that matter to me in terms of creating the school we want to share.
All right, we just take up that point. Will you consult the community, or will you say, look, actually, this school, I know how the school should be. It should be like that one over there. Let's just build it.
It has to be in collaboration with the community. To an extent, certainly we have to get building built. The children will be joining us in September. But I think that ongoing relationship with the community to grow the school, the culture of the school is what matters, and that doesn't start when a building opens. It grows as the school grows.
Anyone got a very brief point to make? There's two very quick ones. The lady there, and then the gentleman 2 rows back.
Yeah, very quickly, coming to your point about Eton being an old school. You go to any of the sort of public schools, private schools around, yes, they may have one very beautiful old building, but you look at the language laboratories, the science laboratories, the good, well-built, purpose-built buildings.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so as is often the case with projects, there's frequently a world of difference between a way of using money that's shiny, exciting, makes people go ooh wow, and a way of using money that actually affects it and delivers results, whether or not they're exactly measurable or not. What do you think are typically the least effective uses of money within most school budgets? And given, if you were to work at a school, given a hypothetical increase, maybe 5%, what do you think would be the most effective way of applying it?
Okay. And I might start that if you'll forgive me, because otherwise we won't get through all these other questions that we've got very well in this afternoon. Any other very quick points on the school building before we just go on here? I just feel like an auctioneer.
Just correct, Chris.
Yeah.
We have carried out post-occupancy evaluation. The department commissioned it.
Yeah, and
buried it because it gave the wrong answer to Mr. Go.
Oh, what? You going to tell us what answer you gave?
But it had a positive impact on the behaviour and outcomes
of
the students.
Okay, it has?
Yes.
And that's verified?
Yes.
All right. Let's move on, if we may. Forgive me for dashing on. John Nicholson from Theatre Interventions. John, are you here? John. Are you in the theatrical silence? Okay, well, in that case, John, we'll, if you don't mind,
continuing pause.
Let's go to Lisa Middle.
Well read.
Does a child's social background still determine her or his chances of success?
What do you think?
Okay, I'm asking the question.
Amira, what do you think? Does where a child comes from actually really predetermine his or her chances of success?
I think it does influence it quite a lot. I think we've seen a lot around, people not applying for jobs and not getting interviews because they come from certain postcodes, or also children feeling that they come from certain areas so they can't aspire to be, let's say teachers or other professions in that way. But I kind of have two views on this. So there's, yes, it does in the wider society, but also I think for the individual it's about whether they take that baggage on. Because if you look at people like, say for example, let's look at Malcolm X, if you look at the background he came from and how he managed to then, come out of that. And I think that's the kind of thing that young people need to be looking at. It does in a sense, but I think that our children shouldn't really take it on and look at it themselves.
At school, at actual education, the person, where they come from, is it going to affect how the person when they leave?
I don't think it affects their learning. I think it affects how they look at the world and look at what they can achieve in the world. I think it doesn't really matter where you come from. You can learn, you can take on, you can get good qualifications. It's about what they, maybe the things that are happening in the area where you come from. So say, for example, you look at St. Paul's where people think, some of the perception is that, you're not going to get a very good education, you're not going to get a good job, and all this. And if, as a young person, you take that on, you then put that out there when you go for an interview, and when so you kind of hold yourself back. But if you came from that environment and you thought, actually, it really doesn't matter to me, I'm going out there, I'm going to do my thing, I've got my grades, and I'm going to do my best in my interviews and all that, you can then probably break through that barrier a bit more. So I think it's about whose baggage it is. If it's your baggage because you come from that area, it's holding you back. But if it's about you go to an interview and it's about the person looking at the application and actually discriminating against you because you come from that area, then that's a different thing.
Fiona?
Yes, well, I think the reasons why some children don't achieve are very, very complicated. And I think part of the problem with education policy often is that the simple solutions are advised are actually complicated. Problems that you can see children from the same background, one who will be much more resilient and than another, and do much better. But I do think we live in a very, very unequal society, and it's getting more unequal, and we can't get away from that fact. And the chances are that if you come from a home where your parents can't afford to feed you, that you haven't got a room to do homework, you're sleeping with 4 or 5 other children in a room, and all your parents are very stressed or got mental health problems or any of those things, it will impact on your education, and we can't get away from that fact. And I think schools are an absolute haven for a lot of children like that. And I know a lot of people say, oh, schools shouldn't be places where sort of social work takes place. But unfortunately, if you're going to help those children achieve, you do need to engage the parents, as others have said. And you do need to help them overcome some of the problems they feel they have.
So should teachers take a look at that child from a disadvantaged background and think, well...
They may not be from a disadvantaged background.
Well, whatever background...
present with complicated problems.
It is, and say, well, it's all right. They don't perhaps have to get the 5 GCSEs.
Yeah, no, I don't
because
think at all. I'm just saying that for some children, that helping those children to get to reach, whatever their ultimate potential is. I don't even like the word potential, I think it's a limiting word anyway. But I mean, for some children will need more interventions, more help, and more support, and that may be to do with helping them to overcome the issues they bring to school with them because of the inequalities that we have in society.
So here's a challenge I think around this question. If in my lifetime a child that grew up in the Speedwell area of the city becomes a Secretary of State for Education, I will know that we've cracked this one. Because I think the issue about background determines success in all sorts of ways. People who are making the decisions about education in the country now, none of them went to a school like I did, none of them went to a school like the one that I lead. So that must have a factor. But this for me is the burning question. Of all the things we talked about this afternoon, this is the one. This is the key question. And when we can say, and it's true, that every child who goes to a school in this country is succeeding irrespective of their background, then we'll have a world-class system. And at the moment, that's what gets me up in the mornings, because we haven't got that. The other issue around it is the question talked about chances of success. And we have to be clear about what defines success. I have a number of children who have done the most incredible life journeys from other parts of the world and are settled in Bristol, who are not going to get ABCCs and they're not necessarily going to get 3 A levels. But the mere fact that they have academic qualifications and aspiration for me is success. The next journey is to help those children get that kind of that quality of experience. So evidence to me suggests that it does, and it was one of the reasons why back in 2006, 2007, when we started opening Bristol Brunel, Bristol Met as academies, it was about that. It was about the moral purpose of trying to do something different to support the most vulnerable children in our communities for whom education previously, in previous generations, hadn't worked. And one of the challenges we've got at the moment is that academies are now lumped together under one heading, along with free schools and converged academies, and they have different purposes and they have different origins around it. So for me it's the ultimate challenge, and sadly I think if we continue to measure academic success as the definition of success, then we've still got work to do.
Okay, I've got a few hands up. Let's just, yes, gentlemen there with glasses.
So the question was about whether your social background affects how you go in the future. I study at Bristol University doing medicine, and I come from a middle class background, but I feel poor at my university. The makeup, the social makeup, is very much skewed from very good backgrounds, from private schools, and I think there is a responsibility from schools, yes, to try and focus on people from poorer backgrounds, but there should also be acknowledgement from universities that they probably won't catch up to get the 10 A stars and need some graduate. But they still have the same potential. And if we look at the evidence, there's frequent evidence which shows that at universities, people from state schools frequently do slightly better than people from private schools. And I think there should be an acknowledgement from universities, and therefore entry requirements perhaps should really take this into account, looking at the background of the child. They do to an extent, but I'm not like that. If you look at my cohort, about 50% private school in medicine, 7% of people go to a private school and 50% get into medicine. They do it to an extent, and they do targeted things and show all publicity. They're sitting to a summer school, do great work with 100 students at Bristol University. But there's thousands and thousands who don't get on those summer school things. There needs to be a bigger initiative, and I think grades into universities would make a big difference.
Is it the university's fault, or is it the schools for not saying to children lower down, look, we think you've got the potential to be a doctor?
I think there is, if you want to say, is it this model, that model? It's a mixture of the two. There needs to be more aspiration in schools, better career advice, and better advice to get those students up.
both Worcester University and the University of the West of England have a really outstanding widening participation programs to address that issue. I don't agree with you that children from poorer backgrounds should be given lower grade entries. Why should that be the case? Our aspiration has got to be that those children will compete with the very best. And I think it's absolutely vital. We have the evidence of our sixth form students now who come from some of those backgrounds who are achieving A's and B grades to get places at Russell Group University. We have to raise the bar for everybody, not just by people's social background.
How do you think people might feel if they were with one of your colleagues at med school and said, well, actually, I have got qualifications that you have, but they let me in because my parents are a bit poor?
Well, just to give you an example, British University is oversubscribed absolutely massively in terms of British English students, and it's got to be about, you've got to look at the evidence when people get into university and how they succeed in that. British University for Medicine, for instance, there's about 2,000 extra people who get in. You could make you could selectively say you want at least 70% from the state school, and you'd still get people with 3 A's from it. You know, there's the scope actually to get people with the qualifications into the universities. It's just you've got to look at the potential of those people, not just at the raw grades, because getting 8 A stars from Eton is a damn sight easier than getting 8 A stars from the local school.
I think this is the crucial issue, the key issue, and it's complicated to talk about, and I really want to agree with the way Amira talked about it. If you're talking to a child from a disadvantaged background, you should say strive for the very best, don't be held back. However, you have to look at the statistics. Almost all variation between schools in terms of outcomes is down to the social class of the children who are in them. And that's the uncomfortable fact. There's a really, really strong correlation in this country between social class, between race, and where you get to in the education system. So we shouldn't tell kids that we should tell kids to strive for the best, but we have to acknowledge that fact is true. And you will not make up for that in schools. It's also true in terms of health outcomes. So the poorer you are, the worse health outcomes you have. That is not the fault of the NHS, and the fact that there is worse outcomes for disadvantaged kids is not the fault of schools. We need to do something about the level of inequality in our society.
Kevin said really that we need to think about the services that are around the child, and I think it comes back to the argument we were having earlier about the either or. Is it the full-grounded individual, or is it exam results? For me as a primary practitioner, it's got to be all of it, because if that child is not at 4 or 5 built up to be a resilient person, given the right resources to enable that child to achieve and go to Bristol University, then it's not going to happen. So it's not an either-or argument, it's that both of those things run alongside. It also requires good support services, good mental health services for some parents, domestic violence, and actually at the moment the poverty in the area where I work is seeing an increase in things like domestic violence and poor children's health. So, and those things then impact on attendance. So it's about having all of those services joined up, supporting our children, so that there is a sense of social justice, so that those children do achieve can go to universities like Bristol.
Would you ever support selection then in any way to bring on children who are bright, have got the potential to be doctors, but perhaps need to be in a different environment?
That shouldn't need to be the case, because a good school will be a good school for all children, and those children will achieve that through the systems and structures that we already have. There shouldn't need to be an elitist structure for those children.
Okay, any thoughts on that? Yes, lady, just on the side there.
I think we've got to look at what this society has done to hinder children who come from disadvantaged backgrounds from achieving. It's not just the schools. The removal of EME from a lot of young people was a really big attack on young people being able to see on post-16 to be able to get those A-levels. For a lot of young children now, getting into Year 11, the thought of taking on a debt of about £65,000 when they leave is also a big hindrance. That's one of the biggest factors that's going to stop young people from believing they have the opportunity to succeed. Because what we're going to see is that kids who have from wealthy backgrounds will still go to university because their parents will be able to pay the fees have huge loans knit throughout the rest of their life, and working class kids are going to be relegated back to the days when they didn't have a proper education post 16. You don't have to do it up front, David, but the problem is that when my son went to Warwick University, in his course, he was in a handful of about 5 or 6 out of about 18 who had a student loan. The rest of them didn't have student loans because their parents could afford to pay for it, because they didn't want them having the debt. It's the working class kids that are going to have to take that debt on for the rest of their lives.
Yes, well, actually, cameraman wants it. You want to speak? You're just telling me I'm in your shot.
In terms of support services, this government are completely dismantling all support services for vulnerable people. So they're taking that as a fundamental attack on working class people in general. Like kids, the benefit changes, the stuff around all the benefits reductions that are going on now are going to hit parents and kids. You know, there's so much stuff which is going to put completely disadvantage a whole generation of kids. And then, that's before you start looking at the amount of youth unemployment there is in this country. So even if you do achieve, you then come out of school, university, and there's no jobs. So it's like, that's not really support.
Actually, let's go to the lady at the back, because she hasn't spoken in any. Do you mind? Walk for you.
Just touching on the point that a few of the other people mentioned, I'm actually the example of one of those people who came from a disadvantaged background. I worked very hard, went to secondary school, got my A-levels, went to university and actually got a law degree. Graduated and got a 2-1 and actually got a training contract. But the barrier still hit me because then I couldn't afford to continue with my education and I actually had to walk away from my training contract. So although I could get that part financed because I did well and I got a scholarship for that, I didn't afford to survive. And when I went to the job centre to get support to be able to continue with that education, they said it's not our job to fund your post-education, it's not our job to help you to succeed. And I then had to give up on my training contract, which I'd worked so hard to get so many years.
They're very hard to get. And what do you do now?
Yeah, now I work for the Prince's Trust. I'm actually an outcomes executive helping young people in the same position as what I was to continue with their education, but every day I still have to live with the fact that I walked away from a scholarship and a training contract, which I should be doing now because I couldn't afford to continue. So I did work hard, did everything I said to do, I didn't let my barriers hold me back, but finances still did.
Given the importance we put on A-levels or not. My wife is a senior doctor. She teaches senior doctors and the skills that senior doctors need to get on in them. These are presentation skills. These are patient management skills. A-level performance has no part in those. They are just part of the education. It's a much, much broader thing.
Well, I'm weakening this because you haven't had there's definitely behind it. We really must. Actually, we're not going to get important thing. This chat with the red doctor. Do you mind? Thank you very much.
Yeah, just a very, very brief point on the social mobility situation. Epitomised by Colston School in Bristol, which is an academy. When they opened a primary school, the government decided that their catchment area would include Cotton and Redland, relatively affluent areas, and would exclude Montpellier and St Paul's, which are nearer areas, but less socially upbeat looking areas, more poverty, more single families and that sort of thing. And that is a problem caused by the academies programme, where the academy has got the competition edge to set its own catchment area, and the catchment area should be set by local authorities and should take into account the relatively less affluent areas.
I don't disagree with you. That's not how I do it. Our academies are local schools for local children, and many academies in the country do exactly the same thing. But you're right, academies do have the ability to set their admissions arrangements. But it's the issue about how does an academy support the young people that live in that community that it goes to. They go to Bristol Brunel, they go to Bristol Metropolitan Academy, you have the Hans Price Academy, you have the King's Oak Academy, I can go on list them all for you again, but they are local schools for local children, because that's our decision, and that's what we believe in.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next question, a very different one. Jenna Bush, who's a teacher at Redland Green School. Hello.
Hi there. I'm also a parent as well of two children, one at primary, one at secondary. So the question kind of comes from a parent background as well as being a teacher, and it does actually link with our conversation we've just had, because my question is, does the panel agree that a good education requires a good diet? If so, why do so many of our secondary schools sell carb and sugar-loaded foods for break time snacks and have vending machines with fizzy drinks, when exactly what you are talking about promotes ill health and low attention spans, and I think it absolutely does our kids total inservice in Bristol.
Why should what should we serve in school lunches? Are you strict at your school about fizzy drinks and chocolate and all that?
Very strict. We promote healthy lifestyles. We at Healthy Schools Plus School agree entirely that those things are not appropriate. Certainly, we don't have them in the primary school. But I think it's about creeping commercialisation, and I think it's up to the leadership of the school to take a strong stance on it. I won't have anything in my school that advertises any kind of that there's a sports group that has Chewits on it. I won't have it in my school, because it's not promoting the right diet for our pupils. And I think it's, you know, in the area that I work in, we've got one of the worst reputations or the worst rates for children's dental health. So it seems to me a moral imperative that we promote healthy lifestyles that try and counteract that. So I feel very strongly about that.
You can do what you want as an academy, can't you? You can set up what you want.
We draw the line at horse meat, Christian. Of course, I was thinking your question for a second. I think there's a really close link between healthy eating and the curriculum, and I think there's a real tension. If you promote healthy lifestyles through the classroom activities, then the children can leave the classroom and go and purchase those kind of products. I think a really important part of our job is to work with children to explain the benefit of healthy diet, the benefit of healthy eating. I know that in the science curriculum in most of our academies there's a real emphasis around that, around diet, about the balance, the impact on sports science, or the put into your body in that kind of performance. We do have vending machines in our schools, but they have things like fruit juice and those yogurt bars that taste like the bottom of a budgie cage. You know what I mean? So children have the opportunity to purchase those. We do have chips on a Friday, because I had some yesterday. And Sunhill Academy, I'm reliably informed by a colleague, at Whole Meal Pizza Day on Thursday. So I think we take it very seriously, but I can't explain how everybody does that.
Fiona, is this a sort of middle class concern?
No, not at all. I would go for, first of all, I would have the same regulatory framework for all schools, because incidentally that applies to admissions as well. And I could go on about admissions at length, because it's not only actually about academy schools, there are many other maintained schools that are worse than the academy schools, because of admissions. I'd have the same regulatory standards, high nutritional standards, and just ban them. And make everyone do the same thing.
Well, so you search kids for fizzy drinks before they
you can search, but I don't think you should be selling stuff that you know is unhealthy and bad for their teeth. No, I definitely don't think so. I think that's a very important thing for the government, the state, to do, to ensure that in places that are publicly funded, children's standards are maintained as well as possible.
Okay, Mira?
Yeah, I totally agree with Fiona. I mean, you can't.
Am I the only person who likes junk food?
But I mean, even the packed lunch boxes, yes, you can't search them, but I mean, everybody has the packed lunch sits in the same area. You can see if they've got fizzy drinks or not. That can get back. You can go back to the parents and say, well, look, this isn't acceptable here. So I think we should take over responsibility, but I definitely wouldn't have it solved in the school.
And Kevin, what about you? What's the only teaching about this?
Same as everyone else on the panel. I'm in favour of junk food, but not in schools.
Anyone for junk food in school here? Let's go back. One question I was put to me to ask, and I missed off my list. It's we're changing the subject again quite dramatically. It follows on from the achievement at school. Could black boys' achievement be improved if there were more black and minority ethnic teachers in the schools where they are taught? It sort of links into why black African Caribbean boys in particular are not doing as well as they might have at school. Anyone want to take that from the panel? Let's start with you, Dave.
I think it was in 2011, Adolf Cameron, the Secretary General of the Jamaican Teacher Association, came to Bristol and he talked about this issue. And it was a really, really interesting bit of work to be done. And his general summing up was that African Caribbean boys were more interested in finding a quick way to make a living than being committed to study, which I think is quite a generalised statement, but I think a lot of us took that on board and we thought about that. In the summer after that, the summer of 2011, 40% of African Caribbean boys got 5 ATCs including English and Maths, and the national average at that time was 58.5. So it's clearly a group of students in our schools that we need to be thinking about how that works. And I like the way that the question is phrased around black and minority ethnic teachers in the schools where they are taught. But I would go back to what we said earlier on about the quality of that teacher. It's not about their gender or their race, it's about how good they are as a teacher. But the Afro-Caribbean boys that we have had success with in our federation have responded really well to older males who are providing a role modelling input.
From their own background?
Yes. And often around sport, and often around the arts in particular. But clearly, I think there's a tension between the schools and the communities that they serve, and the mix around the teaching staff and the support staff that are working with those young people. And that's something I think which we need to be proactively encouraging people from the cross-section of our societies to come and work in our schools, in whatever role that might be. So I think it is one of those challenging areas, and it goes back to the question we asked a moment ago about when everybody succeeds and background is not relevant, that's when we know we will be successful. This is one of those areas where we've still got work to do.
Amira, let's have your take on this. Why do you think boys from that background aren't performing as well as some others, or most others, and would more teachers help?
I think one of the reasons why they're not is because the system is not catering for their needs. And having more teachers and more black teachers may help that, but I think it's about the teaching style, and I think it's about aspiration. Because, you mentioned about sports and arts, which for a black parent with a boy child, that is a nightmare. That is always the way that black boys are pushed, sports and arts, and they are so much more than that. And if it's not that, then it's the music, and what we want is, yes, that fair system, but it's clearly not there. And it has to be, you're saying about teachers, meeting the needs of all children. Well, this is clearly a group that the needs have not been met for a long time. So
what do you mean by different styles of teaching?
It has to be a different style of teaching. That the teaching system at the moment is not catering for them because this has been going on for too long. This isn't just something that just, it happens every now and again. The statistics have shown for a long period of time that black African boys are not meeting the standard. That has to be around the way they are taught. Now, actually recognising that some of the way to change that is to have learning supports. In the schools where I've seen African Caribbean boys make the most progress like yourself is in the schools where there has been role models. They've come in through learning supports. So, imagine how much different that would be if there were actually black teachers in the school and a black ed in the school.
Do you think there's an element that a black teacher could say, be more blunt with a black boy than a white teacher would dare to?
I think definitely. I think there's also a different expectation, which is not necessarily good. That if you have a black teacher in the school, that a black parent would actually expect them to deal with them more like they would be dealt with at home. So they would be more blunt. I think there's a level of different expectations at home as well. But yeah, it's an issue that I think that we really do need to get to the bottom of and actually look at what can we put in place to make these changes.
Yeah, well, I just broaden it out a little bit, because in my community you're having this conversation about white boys on free school meals, not about black children or Bangladeshi children, where enormous strides have been made in some parts of the country. And it's about narrowing gaps between different groups of students, isn't it? I think role models is important. But I think the most important thing is, and I've looked at this Sutton Trust research on narrowing gaps and how to spend the pupil premium, and it is very fascinating because it shows that lots of things we're told work actually don't work at all. But I think the most important thing is to have very, very good teaching across the board and very high expectations. And I think if you get that culture right in schools, I appreciate why you want to focus on this particular group, but I think you have to look at all the groups that are underachieving, and that I think the best way to sort of raise the boats for everybody is that formula of very, very good teaching and high expectations. I mean, there are strategies for different groups within that, that's certainly true.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is this particular group has been bottom of the table for such a long time.
Actually, it's white working class boys at the bottom of the table nationally at the moment, and that's also a hugely difficult cultural group to crack. I mean, maybe it's an issue in Bristol, but certainly in other parts of the country.
Linking that then, let's link that back to your background, where we were saying your background and how unjust the world is. That then possibly it then reflects more in terms of if we look at black boys in prisons. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I know exactly.
So it's that whole reflection
thing. Schools need to have high expectations. But I think that the teachers, I think in the past that hasn't happened. I think that you still hear people saying, "Oh, it's because we've got 60% of our children on preschool."
No, I think teachers are doing what they can. I'm just saying that there's obviously something not hitting with this particular group of people, and that I'm not saying that teachers are not, and it's particularly around Black African Caribbean boys. I'm just saying I think teachers are doing a wonderful job. Teaching has changed so much, but I'm saying it's still not hitting this group, and so there is some underlying issue somewhere that needs to be looked at and recognised, and not put in the same bracket as everybody else, because that's how it keeps getting missed.
But there are lots of groups where
I agree with that, but let's not just put it in the mix. Let's look at it in isolation and see how we can deal with that. Once we crack that, everybody else would get that lift too.
All right, let's just take a few comments from the floor. Why is it just behind you, gentlemen, so the chap in the glasses.
Second row.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I've been reading about some research that on the education system in Finland, where Finland comes top of the international league tables for achievement by school students every year. And what I was reading was that Finland succeeds better than anywhere between breaking the link between home and school. So where children, whether they be from very disadvantaged working class backgrounds, whatever it might be, they achieve much more in Finland than they might in other countries. And the formula is really interesting. They have small class sizes, they don't have Ofsted, they don't have league tables, every kid gets a free school meal. It's not rocket science, is it? But I mean, actually, it goes back to the first debate about the amount of investment in education, and surely that is the overriding issue that's going to address this problem.
I think you're perfectly right in saying that Finland. Basically, we need to clear out a lot of the social tables that we've got in the schools. And basically, on the subject of black dancers here, my name is Joe Black, so basically, walk a mile in my shoes. I'm saying to teachers, basically, come down to where the youngsters are, and basically walk a mile in their shoes and see what they see.
But what can you help us? Why aren't black boys doing well at school?
Because they're misunderstood. They're really misunderstood. It's like I get youngsters arguing with me, and basically you have to look at the way that they're looking at it as such. It's not black things, not white things, and everybody thing, really. Because basically I grew up in St. Paul, St. Rose. We had 7 kids that would go through 12 players. I'm talking about football. Would go through 12 players, and they were never ever seen. And they would do it constantly. And we had such talented people in St. Paul's, academically, socially, all of it. We had a
where are they being failed? Is it school? Is it wild?
They're being failed all round. It's, like I said, it's not a colour thing. Basically, society is failing by the drum. I mean, where we're talking about Finland, and the small classes, well, take a page out of their book, small classes, yeah? And the teachers themselves have been overworked, overstretched, and basically haven't got the time to do so.
I think you're going to come back to you, but let me please take a response from Rachel.
I think it comes back to, as has been mentioned, it's about high expectations. It's about making sure, it's about keeping an eye on those children, you know, whatever background they come from, and trying to give support where it's needed. So if the child is falling behind, you make sure that you give that support, you mentor those students, you give them the support that they need in order to achieve. And I think we've got an awful lot of stereotypes for black children, and we've got stereotypes for girls that are not helpful, and that the schools are often trying to overcome. And I think actually it's getting worse. You know, some of the expectations of students, particularly black students and girls, out in society, it seems to be going backwards and not forwards, and I think we have to really watch that, and it's part of the responsibility of the school to counteract some of those stereotypes that are out there.
Okay. Some people have their hand up. Let's do a couple of quick responses. Yeah, in the front and then at the back, if that's okay, please.
My original question was why are Black African Caribbean boys still not achieving their full potential in the education system? But we've spoken about that, David, you decided to ask that. But I
didn't have your name.
My name's Jasmine.
No, I didn't have your name next to the question. I was told we wanted to be an anonymous question.
But touching back on something that we spoke on earlier, like people who can't afford to maybe go to college or university, there's a lot of people with potential to turn into staff. So we're talking about BME teachers. Maybe a lot of BME people would love the opportunity to teach, but because there is a culture of well, you should do this isn't cool, that isn't cool. In schools, it's for teachers to show children that it's not about being cool or not. I think a lot of black children get caught up with music and the things that Amira was saying that they get pushed into anyway without being encouraged to show that if you're a doctor, you're cool. You know, if you do something in your community, you are very, what you're doing is valued. So what I want to say is there room for training and maybe getting more again to encourage, because it does help.
Do any teachers here recognise that sort of description, really? You see a black boy and you immediately think sport, music, rather than doctor. Lady there.
Sorry, no, I don't. As a teacher and sat with a group of teachers, I think we find it quite difficult. I think teachers, we work very hard with the students that we have in the spaces that we have, be they leaky or creaky or whatever. I think that we try to, with the data that we're given, we try to inspire all young people that come into our classrooms to give them hope. I'm from a family, I was the first person to go to university. I'm very, very fortunate. I was inspired by my teacher to go for it, to make a difference, and that's what I try to do every day in my classroom. And I think there are an awful lot of teachers that do that. So I think saying things that, we miss opportunities, I think we try to do our very best for our students in our care to make sure that they do have the opportunities that we had. And we know how difficult it is out there, and I think that every teacher that you come across will say that they do their very best to inspire, to move people forward, to make sure that they have a choice when they leave education.
I'm a teacher at Liberate Comprehensive, and I think the real issue here is labelling, and I think the most damaging thing that you cannot do for a student is to label them, be it black, white, underachieving, working class. I just think, I work in a science faculty where we don't label our sets as top or bottom in any way. They have names, and the students don't really, unless they explicitly ask you, they don't know what those names mean. And I think that is really motivating. We've done a lot of work on the kind of resilience that was mentioned earlier and growth mindset, and I just think we need to get away from the labelling and stereotyping, because it's really disadvantaging those students by doing that.
Okay. Anyone else carry on that? And then lady there, and then we'll move on.
Hi, I just want to say that I think it says a lot when our education secretary decides to erase or attempt to erase marriage equal from history curriculum. We're talking about black role models, of which there aren't many just by nature of the history of the world. And that says a lot about his stance about more black people in high positions in society and teachers, etc. It's such a bigger issue.
Thank you.
about me, so why should I follow? They don't care about me, all they want me to do is play football or blah blah blah. So, and these are not secondary school children, these are primary school children. So from primary school they've already got that perception because they can't see themselves in society in jobs like teaching or in jobs where, you know, we value being really important jobs in society. They always feel that they can't strive there. And I can do that again and again and again quiz because they feel there's nobody that looks like them in society, in positions. And I think that is a big issue.
For me personally, I can't stress enough the importance of perception and the way that teachers perceive their students. I mean, you have to have high expectations of your pupils, and you have to raise the bar and set it high and let them know that you can achieve. I mean, it's about quality first teaching, and in order to do that, you have to have the values and the willingness to put inclusion at the forefront of your practice. So if teachers know how to include and be inclusive in their approaches to teaching, and I think that's the first step. It's working from the ground up, and it's getting in contact with the grassroots and helping those children that need that support. I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's the thing that we sort of miss, is we look at the system, we look at the big picture, but I think in order to change the big picture, you have to start from somewhere, and I think that's the important one.
I'm going to have to skip many questions, I'm afraid. I've failed you in that respect. We haven't got them through the wall. Let's just go through to question 16 on my list. And Judy Boston, who's a retired teacher here, will deal with this very quickly because we've got phrase and capital. Judy Boston, your final question for us to start with.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Did you have a best teacher, and what made him or her so good? Please could I say that I went to a private boarding school which was so brain-killing that it turned me into a permanent revolutionary.
My most inspirational teacher was a teacher of French. He was a vicar, Church of England vicar, and I remember him saying, if there's an earthquake in this classroom, I want you looking at me as the classroom goes down. He was really committed to the idea of learning. But I think the key thing in this is everybody's most inspirational teacher is going to be a quirky teacher, and we mustn't let our system drive quirky teachers out of the system.
Best teacher was the art teacher, actually. And he was a very, very honest person. And I always remember one day when a friend of mine actually came into the class, having gone to the local shop near the school and had stolen some sweets, and stood there next to this teacher talking to another pupil, and the teacher said, "You need to go and put those back, or I will report you." And I actually looked at this teacher and thought, oh my gosh, you know, and that is what happened. The child actually went back to the shop, and that taught me a lot about that teacher, and I just thought, yeah, that's what I want to be like.
Okay, well, my most inspiring teacher was a history teacher called Mike Baldwin, and he did really bring...
From Coronation Street?
No. He did really bring history alive, but he said to me when I was about 6, and you've got to become a journalist, because he always wants to look into the private life of all these historical characters. Studies, this story has a terrible ending, because I did go on to become a journalist, and he happened to have been married to a TV personality at the time. He'd briefly been married to her in early life, and when I was working on the Daily Express, this woman's name came up one day in the news conference. They said, we found out she was once married to a teacher. And I being rather naive, said, yes, and I know exactly who he is, and I know where he lives. So they sent me to doorstep him, and he wasn't very happy about it. And his picture appeared on the front page of a tabloid paper, sort of looking rather shifty coming out of his house. So that was the end of the story of how he inspired me to become a journalist.
My most inspirational teacher was a lady called Mrs Morris, who's unfortunately no longer alive, at the same school, English teacher at Cotter. I was about 14 years old, and she actually was the first person who told me that I could achieve anything, which is quite a damning indictment of my education, actually. I was quite gobby, believe it or not. And I spent quite a lot of science lessons outside of the room. But Mrs Morris inspired me to believe that I could achieve something. I was capable of doing O-level English, and I could go on. She also had a badge that said a woman's place is in her union. That's it.
It's interesting, isn't it? If we all did this in the room, I wonder how many of our inspirational teachers would be judged by outstanding by Ofsted these days. My inspirational teacher was my dad. My dad taught me to play the piano from about 18 months right the way through to when I was 18 and went to university. And I wanted to be like him. He was my inspiration.
So that's where we have to leave it this afternoon. Can I thank you all very much indeed for coming. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. It's entirely my fault. Any omissions, and I'm to blame. Thank you for having me. I'll see you on the telly, I hope, next week. If you can bear to watch Sunday Politics at 11 o'clock tomorrow. You've got to go, haven't you? You have a train to go to. They want me to get a question about Michael Gogin, but no, I'm afraid you'll have to leave your enthusiasm. I think we've got the answer. Thank you all very much indeed for coming, and good afternoon to you. Thank you.
Yeah, there were some cracking questions that you didn't ask. Yeah. Very good, though.